The heart of the Atlantic Naval Command beat with a low, constant hum, a symphony of cooling fans, server racks, and the hushed, urgent murmur of 100 technicians. It was a cathedral of data, walls plastered with glowing screens displaying satellite feeds, fleet positions, and endless streams of classified intelligence. In this digital sanctuary, Eleanor Vance was an anachronism. A chief petty officer on the cusp of retirement, she worked as a senior archivist, a glorified clerk managing physical records in an increasingly paperless world. Most of her days were spent in a quiet corner, away from the frantic energy of the operations pit, with a large, heavy board of dark, polished slate resting on her desk. The board was etched with a dizzying grid of concentric circles, intersecting lines, and cryptic symbols. Upon it, she would spend hours meticulously placing and repositioning a set of crystalline and metallic pieces, each one a unique, hand-carved shape. To the young, ambitious officers who strode past, she was a harmless eccentric, a relic. Lieutenant Commander Thorne, the brilliant but insufferably arrogant head of cyber warfare, made her his personal mascot for obsolescence. "Still playing Go with yourself, Chief?" he'd call out, a smirk playing on his lips as his coterie of junior officers chuckled. "Don't you know we have simulations for that now? They're a little more advanced than rocks on a plate." Eleanor would just offer a small, placid smile, her eyes never leaving the board. "Something like that, sir," she would reply, her voice calm and even. She never corrected him. She never explained. They saw an old woman with a strange hobby. They saw a fossil. They had no idea she was the keeper of a forgotten language, a sentinel practicing for a day she prayed would never come. The days bled into one another, each marked by the steady rhythm of watches and the casual condescension directed at Chief Vance. Thorne, riding high on the successful implementation of the new Aegis 7 firewall, a system he himself had designed, grew ever more confident. He would often hold impromptu lectures in the middle of the operations pit, using complex jargon as both a teaching tool and a bludgeon of intellectual superiority. He'd point to the massive central screen, a dynamic map of the world's digital traffic. "Aegis 7 is more than a wall," he declared one afternoon, his voice echoing with self-congratulation. "It's a sentient ocean. It learns, it adapts, it anticipates. Any hostile code that touches it is instantly neutralized and analyzed. We are, for all intents and purposes, impenetrable." Several officers nodded in awe. Across the room, Eleanor placed a small, hexagonal piece of polished hematite onto a specific intersection of her grid. The move was slow, deliberate, a study in patience. Thorne's gaze drifted over to her, and the familiar sneer returned. "Chief Vance there still relies on analog," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's preparing for the day the lights go out and we all have to communicate with smoke signals and carved sticks." The ensuing laughter was sharp, a brittle sound in the climate-controlled air. Eleanor felt the sting, but her expression remained serene. She looked at her board, at the intricate, interlocking pieces. They thought it was a game of sticks and stones. She knew it was a map of logic, a physical representation of abstract thought, immune to the very digital plagues Thorne was so certain he had conquered. Her mentor, a man who had broken Soviet codes with nothing more than a pencil and graph paper, had taught her that hubris was the most exploitable vulnerability of any system, human or machine. The campaign of casual mockery escalated from verbal jabs to minor acts of passive aggression. A young ensign, eager to curry favor with Thorne, accidentally tripped near Eleanor's desk while carrying a stack of data printouts. Papers scattered everywhere, and the corner of the heavy slate board was jostled, sending a dozen of her carefully placed pieces skittering across its surface. "Oh, clumsy me!" the ensign exclaimed with theatrical insincerity. "So sorry, Chief. Ruined your game." Thorne watched from across the room, a cruel glint of amusement in his eyes. He didn't say a word, his silence a form of endorsement. Admiral Caldwell, a stern man with 3 decades of command experience, was making his rounds and witnessed the incident. He paused, his gaze lingering on the flustered ensign and the impassive face of Chief Vance. A flicker of something, disapproval, perhaps, crossed his features, but the crisis of the moment was a minor disruption, and he moved on. He had bigger things to worry about than workplace squabbles. Eleanor knelt, her joints protesting quietly, and began to pick up the scattered pieces. She didn't glare at the ensign or complain to the Admiral. As her fingers closed around a cool, quartz pyramid, she thought of the principle of cascading failure. A small, seemingly insignificant disruption could, under the right pressure, unravel an entire system. These young officers, with their unwavering faith in flawless code and redundant servers, had forgotten that chaos always starts small. She calmly returned to her desk, took a deep breath, and began to methodically reset her board, her hands moving with the unhurried grace of a clockmaker, each piece returned to its precise, meaningful location. In the quiet hours of the graveyard shift, when the command center thrummed with a lower, more subdued energy, Eleanor would allow her mind to drift back. She saw the face of Master Chief Cryptologist Robert Bobby Fisher, no relation to the chess grandmaster, a fact he found endlessly amusing. He had been her mentor 30 years ago, a relic even then, a holdover from an era of vacuum tubes and punch cards. He was the one who had introduced her to the board, which he called the Abacus of Babel. It wasn't his invention, but the last working copy of a system designed by a team of paranoid geniuses during the Cold War. They were mathematicians and linguists who believed that one day, all digital systems would become so complex, so interconnected, that they would inevitably collapse under their own weight, or be turned against their creators. The enemy, Ellie, Bobby used to say, his voice a gravelly whisper over the clink of the pieces, will always look for the most complicated way in. Because they're arrogant. They believe their complexity is superior to ours. But the universe is built on simple, elegant rules. The most complex lock has the simplest key, if you know where to look. He had trained her for years, teaching her how the grid mirrored number theory, how the crystalline pieces refracted logic like light, how the metallic ones grounded abstract concepts into solvable states. It was a dying art, a language spoken by two. After Bobby passed, she was the only one left. The Navy had let her keep the board as a sentimental curiosity. They had no idea it was a fully functional, non-digital decryption engine of unparalleled power. The attack came without warning. It didn't trip a single alarm. It didn't hammer against the firewall like a barbarian at the gates. It slipped through the digital ocean of Aegis 7 like a ghost, a whisper of malicious code disguised as a routine system diagnostic packet. The first indication was a flicker on the main tactical display. A friendly submarine in the North Atlantic vanished from the map. Then another. Then a whole carrier group. The screen didn't go black. The icons were simply gone. A technician's voice, tight with anxiety, cut through the hum. "Sir, I've lost contact with the USS Eisenhower. All comms are dead." Panic, a cold and foreign entity in this controlled environment, began to snake through the room. Red lights finally began to flash as secondary systems detected the anomalies, casting the faces of the crew in a hellish glow. An alarm klaxon began to blare, a sound that signaled not an exercise, but an active, existential threat. Thorne rushed to his station, his face pale. "It's impossible," he muttered, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Aegis 7 should have caught this." But the screens were filling with gibberish. Data streams turned into cascading waterfalls of encrypted nonsense. Vital communications weren't just jammed, they were hijacked, twisted into an unbreakable cipher. The impenetrable fortress had not been breached, it had been occupied from within. The enemy was inside, and they were blind, deaf, and utterly powerless. The operations pit descended into controlled chaos. Admiral Caldwell stood on the command deck overlooking the floor, his face a granite mask of fury and concern. "Thorne! What is happening?" he boomed, his voice cutting through the rising panic. Thorne, for the first time in his life, looked utterly lost. He was sweating, his confident smirk replaced by a rictus of disbelief. "I don't know, sir. They're not breaking in. They're already here. They're using our own security protocols against us, creating a polymorphic feedback loop." Every time we try to isolate the corrupted code, it changes, it multiplies. It's beautiful, in a terrifying way. His team of young hotshots were just as helpless. Their keyboards clattered uselessly against digital walls that were shifting faster than they could map them. "I'm locked out of the core," one shouted. "They've taken administrative control," another cried, his voice cracking. They were like master swordsmen who had suddenly found their blades turning to water in their hands. All their training, all their sophisticated tools, were rendered useless. The enemy hadn't just built a better lockpick, they had fundamentally changed the nature of the lock. The room was thick with the metallic taste of failure. For 10 agonizing minutes, the best and brightest of Naval Cyber Command were reduced to helpless spectators, watching their multi-billion-dollar nervous system be systematically dismantled by an unseen foe. The silence from the fleet was the most terrifying sound of all, a void where the lifeblood of command and control should have been. Eleanor Vance had remained at her desk, a small island of calm in the swirling storm of panic. She watched, not the frantic technicians, but the dying screens. She listened to their panicked shouts, filtering out the fear and retaining only the data. Polymorphic feedback loop, prime number encryption base, it's nesting ciphers inside the carrier signals. She closed her eyes for a moment, her mind a whirlwind of pattern recognition. The words were different, the technology newer, but the underlying logic, the philosophy of the attack, it was familiar. It was arrogant. It was complex for the sake of being complex. It was exactly what Bobby had trained her to recognize. A profound choice settled upon her. She could remain silent. She could watch Thorn and his acolytes be consumed by the fire of their own hubris. The thought was tempting, a brief, bitter flicker of vengeful satisfaction. It would be justice, of a sort. But then she looked up at the main screen, at the ghosted outlines where American fleets should be, and the feeling vanished, replaced by the cold, heavy weight of duty. Her oath hadn't been to a commander or to her own pride. It had been to the nation, to the sailors in those dark, silent ships, trusting that someone, somewhere, was watching over them. Forgiveness wasn't about letting the offense go. It was about refusing to let it poison your own purpose. She pushed her chair back, the sound scraping loudly in a moment of near silence as a technician stared at a completely dead monitor. She stood up. Every eye in the room, from the lowest-ranking ensign to Admiral Caldwell on the deck above, turned to her. She walked with a steady, unhurried pace from her quiet corner toward the central operations area, the slate board held securely under one arm, a small leather pouch of her pieces in her hand. She placed the heavy board on an empty console table, the solid thud drawing even more attention. Thorn, his face slick with sweat, turned to her with a look of utter contempt and desperation. "What in the world do you think you're doing, Chief?" he snarled. "This isn't the time for your senile games. We are under attack." Admiral Caldwell's voice cut through the tension like a razor. "Let her work." It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order, born not of hope, but of the complete absence of any other option. A hush fell over the room. Eleanor emptied the pouch onto the table. The crystalline and metallic pieces gleamed under the harsh red emergency lighting. Her hands began to move, and it was as if the years fell away. She was no longer a gentle archivist but a master craftsman at her forge. A technician, near hysterics, shouted, "The master encryption is regenerating on a 64-bit prime cascade. It's impossible to predict." Eleanor paused, her fingers hovering over a multifaceted quartz crystal. "It's not a random cascade," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the electronic chaos. "It's a Fibonacci sequence, masked by hexadecimal decay. They're hiding a simple pattern inside a complex one." Her fingers flew across the board. Click! A silver piece slid into place. Clack! A series of granite cubes were aligned along a curved meridian. It wasn't random, it was a physical calculation, her hands and the board working as a single computational unit. She was building a tangible model of the enemy's code. "Give me the last 3 output strings from the carrier channel," she commanded. A stunned ensign read them off. Eleanor translated them into positions on the board. A pattern emerged, a stunning, geometric symmetry in the apparent chaos. The master key isn't a single string, she announced. It's 3 interlocking keys, deployed sequentially. The first key is sector epsilon, sequence 9-4 delta 1. The variable is the atomic weight of silicon. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the emergency power and the soft clicks of Eleanor's pieces. Thorn stared, his mouth agape, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. An old woman with a board game was speaking a language of cyber warfare more advanced than anything he had ever conceived. It was the ensign who had, accidentally, tripped by her desk who reacted first. Driven by a desperate, last-ditch impulse, he turned to his terminal and typed in the sequence Eleanor had called out. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a single, blessed line of green, unencrypted text appeared on his screen. System_channel_7_ unlocked. A collective gasp swept through the command center. It worked, the ensign whispered, his voice filled with a reverence that bordered on fear. Sir, the channel is clear. Eleanor didn't pause to acknowledge it. Her focus was absolute. They'll adapt, she said, her hands already moving, rearranging the pieces to predict the enemy's next move. The second key is now active. It's based on the previous one, but mirrored. Key 2, sector lambda, sequence 1 delta 4-9. The variable is the speed of light in a vacuum. Again, the ensign typed. A second, larger block of the tactical map flickered back to life, revealing the real-time position of the Eisenhower carrier group, safe and unaware of the digital war that had been waged for their survival. One by one, Eleanor Vance called out the keys. She wasn't just decrypting the attack, she was disassembling it, laying its logic bare for all to see. With each sequence, she announced, another piece of their nervous system was restored. The lights returned to their normal, cool blue. The alarms fell silent. The screens filled with friendly icons and secure communication links. In less than 5 minutes, she had done what Thorne's entire department had deemed impossible. The attack was over. Admiral Caldwell walked down from the command deck, his heavy footsteps the only sound in the cavernous room. He stopped before her table, his eyes not on Eleanor, but on the board. He looked at the intricate patterns, the elegant placement of the pieces, and for the first time, he saw it not as a game, but as a language of pure, unassailable logic. His initial amusement, now a distant memory, had been replaced by a silence so profound it was a force in itself. It was the silence of all. The crisis had passed, leaving a stillness in its wake. The hostile code had been purged, its originators traced to a rogue state's intelligence agency. The fleet was secure. But the atmosphere in the Atlantic Naval Command Center was changed forever. The air, once crackling with the arrogant confidence of youth and technology, was now heavy with a humbling new reality. Admiral Caldwell finally broke the silence, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. Chief Petty Officer Vance, he began, his gaze lifting from the board to meet her calm eyes. On behalf of every soul on every ship you just protected, thank you. He then turned his attention to the rest of the crew, his expression hardening into one of cold command. Let this be a lesson to all of you, he said, his voice like ice. Confidence is a virtue. Arrogance is a fatal flaw. We put our faith entirely in machines and algorithms, and we forgot that the human mind is the most powerful weapon we will ever possess. His eyes settled on Lieutenant Commander Thorne, who stood frozen, his face a ghastly shade of pale. All the condescension, all the smug superiority, had been stripped away, leaving behind the raw, naked shame of a man who had been proven utterly and completely wrong. Commander Thorne, the Admiral said, each word a hammer blow. Your impenetrable system was compromised, and your response was inadequate. You dismissed and humiliated an asset that ultimately saved this command. You are relieved of your duties as head of cyber warfare, effective immediately. Report to my office at 0600. You will be reassigned. It was a career death sentence, delivered publicly. Thorne could only nod, his eyes wide with shock and humiliation. He turned and walked away, the once confident stride now a defeated shuffle. The junior officers who had laughed at Eleanor now avoided her gaze, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. She began to quietly gather her pieces, her work done. The Admiral approached her again, his voice softer now. "That board, what is it?" Eleanor paused, holding a crystal piece up to the light. "My mentor called it the abacus of Babel, sir," she said simply. "He believed that for every complex problem, there is a simple, elegant truth at its center." The Admiral nodded slowly, a deep and profound respect dawning in his eyes. "Chief," he said, "I'm canceling your retirement papers. I'm creating a new department. The Analog Threat Analysis Division. You will be its first director. Name your terms." Eleanor looked at the board, then at the faces of the young sailors around her, now watching her with newfound reverence. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. Her sacrifice of silence, her long years of patient practice, had not been in vain. The old ways had not been forgotten, they had simply been waiting for the moment they were needed most.